Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. You are listening to High Definition Radio right here on Focal Point, the American Family Radio Talk Network, the most feared radio network in all of America. My name is Brian Fisher. The program is Focal Point. The network is the American Family Radio Talk Network. Coming to you live from the Values Voter Summit here in Washington, D.C. from our remote studio at the Omni Shoreham Hotel. Honored and pleased to welcome to our studio here at the Omni Shoreham Krishnan Guru Murthy. He is with Channel 4 in the UK, news anchor and documentary reporter. Krishnan, welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's an honor to be here.
And you and I have chatted. You've been doing an interview with me and some others here at the Values Voter Summit. So now I've got you behind the mic, other way around. And anyway, you and I were talking yesterday, Krishnan, and in your travels with Channel 4 there in the UK, you've been in any number of settings, covered any number of stories. And it turns out you have a personal connection with what's going on in the Middle East because of some of the work that you did. Tell us about your experience in Cairo and Libya.
Well, I mean, I've been very interested to see how this story and the political response to it has been playing out here at the Value Voters Summit and beyond. And I'm particularly interested to see what the impact on the election will be. But I was in Cairo during the fall of Mubarak as the revolution was being declared in Tahrir Square. I was there in that period when the square was occupied by protesters, and I've met Muslim Brotherhood spokesmen and talked to them. And this was obviously in the period where the Muslim Brotherhood was just emerging as the big force that was likely to take over in Egypt. And at that point, they weren't taking part in those demonstrations. So they were not the driving force behind those demonstrations, but they were always a huge organization, deeply rooted in Egyptian society. They had been banned for several years, but they still existed, very much in the forefront of people's lives. They're very involved. I think you have to sort of understand how this organization has come about, and that it's easy to imagine that they are just some sort of militant radical group that inspires, a violent protest. The way they have embedded themselves in Egyptian society and Egyptian life is by being very involved in people's day-to-day lives, very involved in charity work and the provision of services, health care, education, all of that. And by doing that, they have engendered great loyalty amongst a lot of poor people in Egypt. So it's a complicated organization, and it only stepped into Egyptian politics after the revolution. And, of course, now we have a Muslim Brotherhood president.
And what I'm reading, Krishnan, is that the Muslim Brotherhood has essentially taken over the land of Egypt, and they've got Islamist designs on that country. I follow that pretty closely because I'm concerned about the Coptic Christian community there, and they seem to be at increased risk. Mubarak provided some kind of protection for them. I'm not sure that they're going to get any protection from the Muslim Brotherhood. In fact, they may be even in more danger with this leadership than they were before.
Well, they are one of those organizations that is very difficult to pin down. When you say take over, they've been elected. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, they got the votes, and they got popular support. But when you talk to them about exactly what they want, do they want an Islamic State? Do they want to tear up every agreement with Israel? Eradicate Israel? They're very clever in terms of the way they answer the question. So it's quite difficult to know exactly what their ultimate designs are. What the president says is that he wants stability, he wants to exist peacefully with his neighbors, and that he believes in human rights and he believes in freedom. And that's where this becomes very confusing for me, because what we have here in Egypt is an emerging democratic movement, but it's a very young one, and people are very confused. They have no democratic tradition. They don't know what democratic argument is necessarily, and so you end up back in these moments where you have a violent outburst, you have a protest, because all they have known for decades is tyranny, fear, and violent upsurge at different times.
And I don't know if this is the case in Egypt, but I know, Krishnan, here in North America, we know what the agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood is because they spelled it out in a 1991 memo. And they said that what we're here to do, and Muslim Brotherhood in America, their expression is CAIR, C-A-I-R. That's kind of the leading public relations organization for Muslims in America. That's a offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. We've got the Islamic Society of North America, ISNA. That is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. You have Muslim student associations, MSAs, on hundreds of college campuses across the United States. That's an arm of the Muslim Brotherhood. And they said in a 1991 memo that their goal in North America is eliminating and destroying, those are their words, eliminating and destroying Western civilization and sabotaging its miserable house.
But if you ask them that now, they will not say that. That's the difference.
Well, yeah,
if you go to a Muslim Brotherhood leader in Egypt
but
and
here's
say,
the question, do you
is this what you want? They will say, no, it's absolutely not what we want.
But I don't believe them when they say that. I don't believe those denials. In fact, I'm looking at a story here, Krishnan, from Jihad Watch. Muslim Brotherhood praises protests in Arabic, expresses relief that U.S. Embassy staff unharmed in English. So in other words, what the Muslim Brotherhood is doing in Egypt right now is they'll send out a Arabic statement about the protests, and they will praise what is going on. Here was their tweet in Arabic talking about the assault on the U.S. Embassy. Egyptians rise to defend the Prophet. That's favorable. That's commendatory. They're praising that. Then they send a tweet out in English. We are relieved that none of the U.S. Embassy staff were harmed. So they're saying one thing in Arabic to their Muslims, they're saying another thing in English to Americans. I mean, that looks to me to be duplicitous at the minimum.
Well, I mean, this is all about interpretation, isn't it? I mean, if you look at that first tweet, Egyptians rise to defend the Prophet. Now, taken in isolation, you might say there's nothing wrong with that. You know, it depends what your definition of rise is. You know, if it said Egyptians attack U.S. embassy to defend the Prophet, then you would clearly say, well, that's violent, that's wrong, that's illegal, and it's
but what they're doing is they're pictures of Muslims assaulting our U.S. embassy, and in Arabic, they're saying this is great. Here are our brothers and sisters in the Muslim faith defending the Prophet. Then they turn around in English and say a different. So I mean, I don't know how context saves you here, Krishnan. Frankly,
well, it's not about that. I mean, it's just I don't. Do you know what time that tweet was sent out? You know, what was it sent out as the embassy was being attacked, or at the time of the protests? Because that's what I found very interesting about the reporting of all of this in America, and that the timelines have sort of slipped around all over the place, and depending on who you believe.
Yeah, but see, Krishnan, from my standpoint, the timeline would be absolutely irrelevant. If you've got the leading organization in Egypt, Muslim organization, I don't care when they did this, before, after, what came before, what came after, they're showing pictures of Muslims assaulting the U.S. Embassy, violating our sovereign soil, endangering the lives of American citizens, and they say Egyptians are rising to defend the Prophet. They're commending that.
But do you know that's what happened?
They're praising that. Krishnan, I don't care. I don't care when they do that, under what circumstances they do that. That's appalling to me.
Well, you know, I think if that is the case, if that as television images of the U.S. Embassy being attacked were being broadcast, and that the official line was Egyptians rise to defend the Prophet, then I'm sure you'd have a huge amount of support to say that is unacceptable. The question is, when was that sent out? And I think that's where accuracy and I think sort of taking a little time is worth looking at, because
but see, again, I look at that, Krishnan, and I say, man, the timeline is irrelevant.
Well, what if they hadn't attacked the embassy by that stage?
Well,
what if it was just
this was in connection.
What if it was just a protest?
This is in connection with the assault on the embassy. That's what they're talking about. They are rising to defend the Prophet by assaulting the U.S. embassy. That's what they're talking about.
But what if it was just a protest at that stage and that there had been no assault on the embassy?
Well,
because that would not necessarily be wrong.
That was an assault right from Jump Street.
Was it? I mean,
that thing started off as an assault.
I don't know that for a fact.
I don't think it started off. Well, again, maybe neither of us knows the complete answer to that question. But let me jump. We just got a couple minutes left. Let's jump over to Libya. You went to Libya right after Gaddafi fell. And what were your impressions? What did you see there?
Again, I think what we are looking at here are really immature democracy movements. People who do not really know what to do with their newfound freedoms. And I think this is the big challenge for American politicians. That's what I find the language in the room today very interesting, in that I guess that the challenge for America is to look at these countries and say, where do we stand on whether the Arab Spring was a good thing or not? You know, do we think that it is our job as the world, most powerful democracy, I was going to say the biggest, but India is the biggest, of course, the most powerful democracy certainly in the world, is it our job to support pro-democracy movements through thick and thin, through the rough and the smooth, or do we say actually this was a mistake and we were better off when there were dictators in control?
Well, see,
that's the big challenge for American politics.
And see, I guess, Krishna, my reaction, and we got just about a minute or so left, so you'll kind of have the last word here, but my reaction, Krishna, is that it is impossible to build a democracy in a Muslim country because Islam will not permit it. Islam is about control, it's about domination, it's about totalitarianism, it's about imposing the rule of Sharia. It is not about respecting. It's not about respecting freedom of. Well, Turkey's moving into an Islamic direction as we speak. So my contention is that, and the Muslims in Turkey are pushing back against the effort to maintain a secular government there, and they're not going to succeed. That wall is starting to crumble, which would mean of the 56 Muslim nations in the world, that would mean 56 of them by the time Turkey falls are going to be Muslim in orientation. I just got 30 seconds. Do you think democracy is possible in a Muslim nation? Last word.
You know, I would hate to predict. I think there are people there who really want it. I've spoken to lots of people out there who are desperate for freedom, who are desperate for democracy, and will go through an awful lot to try and achieve it. Whether it will be in our lifetimes, who knows?
Well, that's a fair way to end it. Our guest has been Krishnan Guru Murthy. He's with Channel 4 of the UK. He's a news anchor, documentary reporter, and I think, Krishnan, we may be doing a little more chatting after the program, after we're off the air here. Thank you for dropping in as my guest. You've been listening to Focal Point on AFR Talk. Great to have you on board with us. Enjoyed having you in the conversation today. You'll have a great weekend. God bless you. And don't forget, we, with God's help, are fighting a winnable war. Have a great weekend. See you on Monday.